Luke Goodrich and Congressman Andy Biggs are up next. But first, Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear has ordered members of the Maryville Baptist Church to self-quarantine after they attended a drive-up Easter service last Sunday. Kentucky State Police were sent to the church to document the license plates of attendees. The governor issued a letter to church members warning them to self-quarantine for 14 days, and that failure to comply could cause them to face legal repercussions. Here to discuss religious liberty concerns during this pandemic is senior counsel at the Becket Fund and author of Free to Believe, The Battle Over Religious Liberty in America, Luke Goodrich, and chairman of the House Freedom Caucus, U.S. Congressman from Arizona, Andy Biggs. Thank you both for being here. Gentlemen, I want to get your reaction to what Attorney General William Barr said earlier this week to Laura Ingraham about restrictions on religious gatherings during the pandemic. Watch.
As I indicated in my Notre Dame speech, I think religious liberty is the first liberty. It is the foundation of our republic, and a free society depends upon a vibrant religious life among the people. So anytime that's encroached upon by the government, I'm very, very concerned. Whatever restrictions the government's willing to put on everybody else, like athletic events or concerts and so forth, they can technically do it to religion as well, as long as they're not singling out religion, as long as it's really necessary.
Luke, you represent the Little Sisters of the Poor in their ongoing case against the government. In a time of pandemic when public safety and health are concerned, is the AG right here? Are there limitations?
Well, the first and starting principle is that we all have a fundamental natural right enshrined in the Constitution to the free exercise of religion and freedom of assembly. And that's the starting point. And the Attorney General is correct. There are exigent circumstances where the government can impose some restrictions on the exercise of religion. Mm-hmm. And at the height of a pandemic, where there is serious threat to public health, there may be a place for temporary restrictions on religious exercise, but those have to be applied in an even-handed fashion. They can't single out religion, and they can't go after religion when there really is no threat to public health.
Congressman Biggs, from your standpoint as a lawmaker, should the government be able to suspend or restrict these religious gatherings, even when churches care to follow, or they take care to follow the pandemic guidelines for social distancing, et cetera? I mean, last week in Greenville, Mississippi, police were ticketing members of this Temple Baptist Church who gathered in their cars for a drive-through service. They were warned to leave, and those who would not were cited $500 fines.
Yeah, no, the reality is government, in my opinion, has no business putting the restriction on religious worship at any time. At any time. It is the people's determination to decide whether they go out and exercise their religious liberties. And if to take your question, what we are seeing is tyrannical in nature. I mean, you had a tactical team going to a church in California where they were practicing social distancing, where they had masks on, and they came in and went after him. I mean, this is absurd, and I think it undermines the very essence of who we are as Americans. The first right is the right of religious freedom and religious worship. I'm very loath to see any restriction placed on that, but that's where I stand.
Yeah. Luke, when citizens are allowed to shop at groceries, they can go to the Lowe's or the Home Depot, pick up food from restaurants, why restrict their ability to worship if they're adhering to distancing guidelines, if they're outdoors? Is this part of a pattern you're seeing, and does it concern you?
Yeah, I think the biggest pattern we're seeing is that religious organizations are actually quite ahead of the government in many cases in taking these sorts of precautions, protecting their members, and really protecting their most vulnerable neighbors. And you have religious groups out there running food pantries, setting up crisis hospitals, and really being on the front lines of caring for those who are most in need. And so what government really needs to do in this circumstance is recognize that religious groups are necessary. They are truly essential, not only in the physical services that they're providing, but also in the spiritual nourishment that they're providing to people in a real time of crisis. And so the government officials here need to take every pain they can to ensure that religious services continue.
Congressman, there have been cases of churches, for instance, here in Louisiana, in Baton Rouge, they held services inside their sanctuary without social distancing. But the question is, when you have churches abiding by this, when the restrictions are in place, is there an infringement of rights here? And what, if anything, can Congress do about it?
Well, first of all, there is an infringement of rights. And what Congress needs to be doing is we need to be petitioning the executive branch, the Department of Justice, who is supposed to make sure, by the way, the government's first job is to make sure our rights are not infringed. So we go to the Department of Justice and we should be saying, look, you have got to make sure that in states, and I'm next door to California, so I see a lot of their news. And I will just tell you, when you see that, you have to say, you've got to get in there, Department of Justice, and make sure these rights, these fundamental rights, are protected and not allow for the infringement of those rights. That's where Congress needs to be right now.
Yeah. Luke, churches are now suing the government for restricting this right. They've won a few emergency rulings. Do you expect to see more of this in the days ahead?
I think you will see a few more lawsuits here and there in the days ahead, but these wins are good signs. They're good signs that the courts recognize religious freedom as a fundamental constitutional right, and the government can't restrict it. You know, even in a pandemic, the government can't overreach and shut these services down. And so I think what you're going to see in the coming days is not only more victories, but also governments coming to their senses and recognizing that religious services really are essential and that they should be allowed to go forward.
Congressman Biggs, I've got to shift to, we have now at least 23 million Americans out of work. I know you've been pushing hard to get the country to reopen, to get the economy back on track and restarted. Are we risking public health by rushing back to work, as some have suggested, that you could incite a second wave and overwhelm the system and it could take untold lives, they claim?
Well, I'll just make a couple quick points on that. Number one, when we see the emotional, mental toll of people who are losing their jobs, some people losing their whole life savings because their business is going out, we see the rise of suicide, domestic violence, child abuse, alcoholism, drug addiction. Those pathologies follow. When you also see the failure to allow a full and robust use of our medical system, then you also put other people in jeopardy as well. So you have to understand that balance. And then I would just say, Luke made the point earlier, and I think you did as well. If you can go to the liquor store, the marijuana dispensary, and the grocery store, and you can socially distance yourself, then I would suggest that you can probably open up your economy and trust the great American people, who I have tremendous hope in, to be wise in social distancing and making sure that if you're sick, you stay inside. If you're vulnerable, you stay inside. I just have a tremendous belief in the American people. And I think when we open up the economy, it's going to be a benefit to mental and physical health as well.
No, I'm very troubled. You see the president, it looks like he's going to open up the country and allow the governors and the mayors and the municipalities to figure out how they want to reopen that, how that rolling reopening will take shape. But it seems to me it's a lack of innovation or desire when you just say, well, we're just going to close everything up to keep people safe. No. We've dealt with pandemics before. There are GUV lights. There are temp checks. You can impose these things and keep people safe. Eat out of doors. There are certainly options to keep this going. Congressman Biggs, before I get back to Luke, was it a mistake for the president to divorce the economic from the health, to not have one corona task force that had both medical and business leaders on it? I worry that you're pitting the health against the economic here when they are inextricably linked, in my eye.
Well, I'm not going to say whether it's a mistake. I just know that the people that were advising him were telling him that 2 million people are going to die. And then, and they were including, even with these measures that they put in place, they were including that as part of the models. And then they've just had to keep revising the models. But I would just ask this question, Raymond. I think this is critical. We have almost 35 million people who got the flu this past year, over 500,000 hospitalized. and multiple tens of thousands succumbed through this. Are we supposed to now plan on closing our economy every year when we have the annual flu epidemic, which we have? We have a flu epidemic every year, and we have a vaccine. We have treatments in place. And I just think that we have got to approach this wisely and take care of all of the needs of Americans. I just shouldn't say take care of, but take into account the needs of all Americans as we are looking at policy that we're driving.
Luke, I'm going to give you a quick last word. I know you're going to be arguing the case for the Little Sisters of the Poor, but it's via teleconference. How might that change the way you present this case?
Well, it's a really unique situation where for the first time the Supreme Court's hearing oral argument by telephone, and you got 9 justices firing questions away, and in person they often talk over each other, and it's a really tricky dynamic. So that's going to be multiplied on the telephone, but the great thing is we are representing the Little Sisters of the Poor. They are caring for the elderly poor on the front lines of the COVID-19 crisis, and all they're asking is for let them serve, let them get back to caring for the elderly poor, and we're confident that the Supreme Court is going to see it their way.
Okay, we will keep tabs on that. Congressman Luke, thank you both for being here. And Luke's book, Free to Believe, The Battle Over Religious Liberty in America, is available now at bookstores everywhere and online. Thank you both. Stay safe.
Thanks, Raymond. Thanks, Luke.
Thank you.